Hey, if you are a PC builder or someone who is even remotely connected to the PC building and gaming community, then you must be aware by now that this particular part of the world is kind of on fire at the moment due to crazy high RAM and storage prices. Tech industry's two-letter obsession, AI, has recently developed a pretty strong appetite for high bandwidth memory and storage devices, kind of gobbling up all the resources required to manufacture these products, creating a worldwide shortage and price hikes, especially in case of RAM. To say that things have gotten out of hand would be massively understating the situation, because the situation has not only gotten out of hand, it has reached so far beyond that some are, speculating that this may be the beginning of the end of affordable PC gaming as a hobby. Well, to be honest, gaming has been quite demanding recently. And I'm not talking about demanding on the hardware due to release of unoptimized Unreal Engine 5 titles every now and then. I'm actually talking about unreal hardware prices that we gamers have to cope with every now and then. But usually the one component that takes the center stage when it comes to freakishly outlandish hardware price hikes is the GPU. And in 2025 too, we witnessed something like that. When towards the beginning of the year, AMD and nvidia both launched their 9000 and 5000 series GPU lineups. They showcased the cars to us and slapped an MSRP on them. But when the cars actually arrived at the market, we learned something pretty important: the significance of the letter S in MSRP, that stands for suggested. Because from manufacturers to retailers, nobody decided to give an actual shit to what was suggested. It was not until September 2025 when things really started to stabilize. Most of the models were available at MSRP or near about MSRP, and it seemed like PC building was back on track until this happened. Out of absolutely nowhere, the RAM apocalypse hit us, and within a course of 1 month, DDR5 RAM saw its price increase by 300 to 400% here in India. Closely following suit were the prices of DDR4 and SSD prices, which saw an increase of 100 to 150% as of today. AI data centers' demand for high bandwidth memory and their willingness to pay any ridiculous amount of money to procure them has left RAM manufacturers with little incentive to, allocate resources for the production of consumer based DDR memory, because they can allocate those same resources for the production of HBM and make shit ton more profit. And we PC builders are left picking up the leftover crumbs at crazy high prices. And this situation is quite different from the earlier price hikes that we have witnessed over the years, whether it be during COVID, mining era, scalping, or the great fake MSRP of 2025, because all those situations affected the GPU, and it is possible to build a functioning computer without the GPU. You can either wait out the crisis or get something from the second-hand market that would have your back till the crisis is over. But without RAM and storage, it is not even possible to build a system to begin with. And this crisis has the potential to spread beyond PC gaming to any device that has got RAM in it, like laptops, consoles. GPUs have RAM in them, and their prices are once again expected to increase very soon. Also, cell phones have RAM in them, and if things continue like this, that market is also going to get affected sooner than later. I know it sounds all doom and gloom at the moment. Well, gamers are a resilient bunch, and gaming has endured in the past, and I'm pretty confident gaming will endure this one as well. So, in this video, we're going to check the prices of various components and try and configure some entry level to mid range builds at three different price brackets. Builds that should deliver you solid gaming experience without having to bulldoze your bank. So, let's start configuring some builds. Now, if you're looking to buy PC hardware online in India, then you should definitely know about this website, pcpricetracker.in. Through this website, you can track and compare the prices of various components available at various online retailers here in India. You can also sort the components based on price, and if you find something interesting, you can directly visit the product page on the retailer's website by clicking here on the price. Another cool feature offered by this website is the configure build option, through which you can select various components for your build and get an idea of the price that your desired build will cost. And I'm going to use this configure build option to create builds at various pricing brackets. Alright, for the first build, I would like to configure within a budget range of 85,000 to 95,000 rupees. Now, due to the crazy DDR5 prices, AM4 builds have suddenly become relevant again. Since AM4 uses DDR4 RAM and DDR4 is not as badly affected as DDR5. Yeah, that's right, 100 to 150% price increase of DDR4 somehow doesn't seem as bad. Such are the crazy times we are living in. So today, if you have a budget of around 90,000 rupees, then AM4 can provide you a pretty good value for your investment. Thankfully, there are some really great components available under the AM4 platform. So let's check them out. Let's start with the processor. Well, the cheapest M4 processor available in India currently is the Ryzen 5 5500 for 7,864 rupees. It's a 6-core 12-thread processor with maximum boost clocks of up to 4.2 GHz and a TDP of 65 watts. However, it has a L3 cache of only 16 megabytes, and also it is limited to PCI Gen 3. So if you happen to purchase a GPU that has only 8 PCI lanes like the RTX 5060 or the RTX 5050, then you can see some performance drops. So if you're really on a tight budget, only then I would suggest you to pick this one up. However, for only 2000 rupees more, you can get the 5600F, and I believe it's a much better option. It supports PCI Gen 4, although it has got slightly less boost clocks than the 5500 at 4 GHz, but it has got 32 MB of L3 cache, twice that of the 5500, and games really love L3 cache. That's why the X3D CPUs are so good at gaming, because they've got massive L3 cache stuffed in them. So the processor that I'm choosing is the 5600F at 9869 rupees. Moving on to the motherboard. As for the chipset, the B550 is the obvious choice in my opinion, and there are some pretty decent B550 motherboards out there. Let's sort by price. Now, although the cheapest one is for 7,300 rupees, but the cheapest option is not always the best option. Actually, there are two components I do not recommend chipping out on while building a PC: the motherboard and the power supply. So, if we move a little bit upwards in price, the Gigabyte DS3H at 8500 is a pretty decent option. It comes with 5-phase VRM, which should be sufficient for the 5600F we have selected. But if you want something with Wi-Fi, then for 900 rupees more, you can get the MSI Pro VDH Wi-Fi. Although the Wi-Fi supports only up to 433 megabits per second, but it's better than nothing. As for the VRMs, although the VDH has only 4 phases of VRM, but the MOSFETs used are of much higher quality, and it actually runs much cooler than the 5-phase DS3H. Both the cards have 6 USB Type A ports on the back, and whichever board you choose, both are solid options and can handle any AM4 processor even if you decide to upgrade to a Ryzen 9 5950X in the future. But for only gaming, you don't really need a Ryzen 9. So let me just select the VDH because it has Wi-Fi and I like Wi-Fi. We will do graphic card and power supply later on. First, let's choose the component for which we are making this video in the first place: memory. If you want 32 gigs of DDR4, then this Patriot Viper Elite 2 at 19,000 seems to be the cheapest option. However, it's a single stick of 32 GB, so you will have to use single channel instead of dual channel, and some games tend to lose performance while using single channel memory. So to use dual channel, we will need a kit with two 16 GB sticks, and the cheapest one available is this Team Group T-Force Delta RGB at 20,900. It has a speed of 3200 megatransfers with CL16 timings, which is decent enough. So let's select this kit for our build for now. We can of course go for a 16 GB of memory and reduce a little bit of load of our budget. But for now I'm selecting this 32 GB kit, and if this build surpasses our price bracket, then we will switch to 16 GB. Alright, time to select the storage. As for how much capacity you need, I think 1 TB is the bare minimum nowadays. And NVMe M.2 is what I would recommend cause they are much faster than SATA SSDs. Also in 2026, I would recommend to get a Gen 4 drive. Storage is also another component that is affected by the AI price tags that has plagued the memory side of things. So the prices unfortunately have more than doubled. Now, this Kingston NV3 M.2 for 14,100 is a pretty good drive actually. It's a Gen 4 drive and it has a read speed of up to 6,000 megabytes per second and write speeds of up to 4,000 megabytes. So let's select this Kingston one for our build. Alright, now let's select the most expensive component of our build, the GPU. Although RAM prices nowadays is really giving the GPU a run for its money. Now honestly in 2026 it really sucks that both AMD and nvidia have released their most affordable cards having only 8 GB of VRAM. GPUs that are otherwise quite powerful and sometimes are held back only by the 8 GB of VRAM on them. While playing competitive esports and multiplayer titles, 8 GB of VRAM should be sufficient. However, in case some of those AAA single player titles, You may need to tune down some VRAM intensive settings like texture to avoid stutter if you have only 8 gigs of VRAM. But if you need more than 8 gigs of VRAM, the cheapest options would be the Intel Arc GPUs. The B570 with 10 gigs of VRAM, which costs around 24,500 rupees, and the Arc B580 with 12 gigs of VRAM going at around 29,400 rupees. However, while Intel GPUs do have higher VRAM, there is a catch. These GPUs have a CPU overhead issue, which reduces their performance when paired with older CPUs, like in our case the 5600F. However, no such performance loss is observed with AMD or NVIDIA GPUs when paired with such older CPUs. Intel is of course trying to address the situation and has provided some game specific improvements with driver updates, but there are a large number of games out there where the issue still persists. So until Intel releases a universal solution, it is really difficult to recommend Intel Arc because most people opting for Intel Arc GPUs are most likely on a tight budget and possibly are using older CPUs. So the most relevant option at entry level is in my opinion the RX 9060 XT 8GB, which is available for 28,999 from Computex Store. Other options include the RTX 5050, which is also an 8GB card and is available for 25,799 but is a lot slower than the 9060 XT. And if we check the GPU database of TechPower, the 9060 XT 8GB is around 32% faster than the 5050 while costing only 4,000 rupees more. Now, there is also the 5060 8GB, which is costlier than the AMD card and delivers similar performance. Now, previous generation cards like the RTX 4060 is also available at similar price as the 9060 XT 8 gigs, but is significantly slower. The previous generation 7700 XT is also available at 34,500 rupees and it has 12 gigs of VRAM. And this is also a very interesting option to consider. The 7700 XT is a little bit faster than the 9060 XT, but the 9000 series has FSR 4 support, greatly improved RT, and all of the FSR restaurant features are exclusive to the 9000 series. The 9060 XT 16 gig model is currently going for 40,400. It's of course your personal preference really what kind of compromise you are willing to make. But for now, let's choose the 9060 XT 8GB model and finish our build. And later on, we'll see if you can tweak things a little bit. For the power supply, as I've already mentioned, I don't really like to cheap out on the power supply as it is one of the most critical components of our build because it's responsible for powering up all the components. Thankfully, there is a list called SPL PSU tier list where almost all PSUs commercially available are ranked based on quality and performance. And AMD suggests we use a 450 watt power supply with the 9060 XT 8GB that we have selected for our build. However, I always recommend to purchase a PSU with a little bit higher capacity than what is usually recommended, just in case you decide to upgrade your GPU or CPU in the future to a more powerful one. So, with a little bit future proofing in mind, I decided to go for a 650 watt PSU. And the MSI Mag A650BN is a decent enough power supply in my opinion. It's a tier C bronze rated PSU, but for an entry level build, this should suffice. It has got these basic protections which is typical to most mid-range power supplies nowadays, and it has also got 5 years of warranty. As for the cables, there are two 8-pin PCI cables for the GPU, which is actually plenty. The GPU we selected requires only one 8-pin connection. So overall a decent PSU for 4,299 rupees. But if you are looking for something even better quality, the Deeppool PN650D is a very good PSU for 6,289 rupees. It's a tier B cool rated power supply and also has ATX 3.1 support, meaning it comes with a 12 volt 2 by 6 cable for directly powering up the RTX 4000 and 5000 series GPUs. It also has got 10 years of warranty. But for budget constraints, in our build, we will go with the MSI Mag A650BN. Quickly moving on to the case, I think it is one of the components whose selection is pretty subjective because it affects the overall looks of your build and looks can be subjective. However, there are a few things I would pay attention to cases besides looks like the size of motherboard support, GPU clearance, cooler clearance, fan support and the number of pre-installed fans.
Now for our build, I would like to go with the very popular MSI MagForge 120A Airflow. It has a 320mm GPU clearance and comes with 6 pre-installed fans and costs only 3499, which is absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. Finally, we have to select a CPU cooler. Now, many processors come with out-of-the-box CPU coolers, but the 5600F unfortunately does not. But it is also not a very difficult CPU to cool, even with PBO enabled. And there are really some great coolers available at good budget options, like this Ant Esports ICE C612 digital RGB cooler for 2035 rupees. It has got 6 copper heat pipes and a 120mm fan. It also has a digital display on the top to display the CPU temperature in real time, which is kinda cool. It is a decent CPU cooler, and this is what I'm choosing to complete our build. So, this particular build cost us 93,144 rupees, which falls into the first category of price bracket as I mentioned earlier. Now, if I want to tweak the price of this build, I would only change a couple of components, the RAM and the GPU. You see, we have selected 32 GB of RAM for this build, which is kind of the sweet spot nowadays. However, with the RAM prices skyrocketing, choosing a 16 GB of RAM for this build is also not a crazy idea because most games still list 16 GB of RAM as the recommended configuration. So if we reduce our RAM to 16 GB, let's see, we need to find a kit that has got two 8 GB sticks. There, the Add Data's XPG Spectrix is available for 13,499, and selecting this reduces the overall cost of our build to 85,743, and this is a pretty solid entry level build. You can also select the RTX 5050 and reduce the cost of the build by further 4,000 rupees, but you will be sacrificing a lot of performance. There is another route you can take. If your budget is around 95,000 rupees, if we keep the RAM at 16 gigs and go for a 16 GB of 9060 XT model. So let's take a look. GP prices have really started to climb in the past few days. The cheapest 9060 XT 16 GB model is available for 40,399, and selecting this 16 GB model makes our build cost 97,143. So there you go. I think I have covered most of the build options between 85,000 to 95,000 rupees if you are purchasing online. Unfortunately, I could not configure an AM5 build within this price segment due to crazy high DDR5 prices. So let's move on to our next segment, 1,10,000 to 1,25,000 rupees for 1440p gaming. To upgrade to the next pricing bracket, targeting 1440p gaming, we can actually afford the AM5 platform now. Actually, I'll be using some of the components from the previous build, like the SSD, the CPU cooler, and the cabinet. Now, as for the processor, one of the best value for money AM5 processor is the Ryzen 5 7500F, going for 13,894 rupees from Computech. It's really a good budget CPU with a boost clock of up to 5 GHz and a default TDP of 65 watts, and also an L3 cache of 32 MBs, which is the same as the 5600F from our earlier build. So let's select this. Moving on to the motherboard. Although the B850 chipset is out for quite a while now, the B650 can still provide all the features an average gamer would look for, and there are some decent budget boards available under this chipset. For instance, this MSI B650M gaming Wi-Fi is not the absolute best board out there, but it is strong enough to handle the 7500F we have chosen for our build. Just don't go around throwing a Ryzen 9 in this one and you'll be fine. This board comes with 6 Type A USB at the back, and it also has got 2 M.2 slots. So let's select this one. It is available for 9500 from TLG Gaming. Now, if you're wondering why I did not go with Intel, well, let's take a look at some numbers. The most relevant Intel CPU at this price bracket is the 12400F in my opinion, which is currently going for 14,350 rupees. As for the B760 motherboard, we have the Gigabyte B760MK V2 at 7,449 rupees, and it is the cheapest option available. That makes the total platform cost for the Intel build at about 21,800 rupees without the memory. Now, the AM5 platform cost, that is the processor and motherboard together, that I've suggested so far in this build is 23,400 rupees, which is slightly more than the cheapest Intel build. However, the 7500F is a lot faster than the 12400F when it comes to gaming. You can refer this hardware unboxed video comparing these two CPUs, where they found that the Ryzen CPU is about 20% faster than the Intel counterpart. Also note that the Intel platform cost that I arrived at was selecting the cheapest B760 motherboard. However, if I was actually recommending a B760 build, I would have suggested a better quality motherboard like the Gigabyte B760 Gaming at 10,348 rupees, which would have increased the platform cost further. So the AM5 platform is actually providing better value for money, and that's the reason why I am going with AM5 platform instead of Intel's LGA 1700. As for the memory, well, unfortunately, due to the crazy high DDR5 prices at this bracket of 1,15,000 to 1,25,000 rupees, I have to go with 16 GB of DDR5 RAM. Of course, it is possible to have 32 GB of DDR5, but we'll have to substantially cut down our GPU budget and we'll end up with a system that performs similar or maybe slightly better than the AM4 builds, which I suggested earlier. So we are kind of stuck with 16 GB of DDR5 for now. Also, I could not find any 16 GB kit with two 8 GB sticks at prices that would make sense. So going with single channel 16 GB, which may see some reduced performance in some CPU intensive situations, but not usually that noticeable in real world. Also, since the motherboard we selected has only two memory slots, investing in a 16 GB single channel stick makes sense as you can purchase another stick in the future to get 32 GB dual channel support. But make sure you purchase the same RAM model when you go for the second stick. So the memory model that I am inclined to choose is the G-Skill Ripjaws CS5 6000 megatransfers at CL36 for 17,999. There are cheaper, there are cheaper sticks at slower speeds and timings. However, since we are already sacrificing some performance by going single channel, having a faster stick would compensate a little bit. So this skill Ripjaws S5 for 17,999 it is. One thing about these RAM speeds, these are actually overclocked speeds and needs to be enabled from the BIOS by turning on Expo or XMP, whichever your RAM kit supports. AM5 motherboards supports both Expo and XMP kits, whereas Intel motherboards supports only XMP. So make sure you enable this feature in the BIOS, otherwise you will be running at base JDEC speeds of 4800 megatransfers per second and not the maximum rated speed of your memory. Now, for the GPU. Well, GPU prices are fluctuating so much nowadays that I actually had to record this section 3 times, as every time I select a GPU at a particular price, by the time I'm done editing, the prices increase. I initially wanted to suggest the RTX 5070 for this build, as it was available at MSRP and would have fit in our budget. But unfortunately, the cheapest 5070 now costs 60,200 rupees and increases our build cost well beyond 1,25,000. However, I did come across a card that I thought was kind of extinct, but here we are. The RX 7900 GRE for 50,000 rupees is, I believe, an excellent value for money offering. This is actually a beast of a card when it comes to restoration performance. And if I take a look at its performance at Tech Power Up, it is about 19% faster than the RTX 5060 Ti 16 GB model, but costs about the same. This card also offers decent ray tracing performance, matching the 4060 Ti in some titles, and sometimes even matches the 5060 Ti 16 GB models. It has got 16 GB of VRAM, which is perfect for 1440p gaming. And although AMD has not officially announced it, but the leaks and rumors are pretty strong that some version of FSR4 will be made available for RDNA 3 cards by the end of this year. There is already a modded Int 8 version available that RX 7000 series users can use if they want to. So for 49,999, I am selecting the RX 7900 GRE from Variety Infotech. However, if you find this card unavailable, the RX 7800 XT or the RTX 5060 Ti 16 GB are actually available at near about the same price, with the RX 7800 XT being a little bit cheaper but about 12% faster in raster, because I don't really think the GRE will be available for much longer. As for the power supply, a 750 watt PSU should be sufficient for our build, and at this price bracket, I would recommend at least a tier B unit. So the Deepcool PN750M for 7,489 rupees would be my personal choice. It's a tier B gold rated unit, fully modular with ATX 3.1 support. But if you find this a little bit too expensive, the Deepcool PN750D at 6,593 is also a decent option, The major difference compared to the PNM model is that the PND model is not modular. Rest of the features are more or less similar, and you can choose either of them. I will select the PN750M model for this build. And that completes our build with a total build cost of 1,18,513 rupees. If you have a little bit more to spend, then you can opt for a better CPU or motherboard, or maybe both depending on your budget. If a better motherboard is what you are looking at, then the Gigabyte B850M Force Wi-Fi 6E for 12,794 is a solid option. You can also opt for a faster processor like the 7600X for 17,994 rupees. Upgrading both will take the cost of our build to 1,25,904 rupees. So that wraps up this pricing bracket. Let's move on to what you should choose if you have more than 1,50,000 to spend. At this price point of more than 1,50,000 rupees, we should not only be able to crush 1440p gaming but also be able to play 4K with decent enough performance, maybe using a little bit of upscaling sometimes. Now, we could just upgrade the GPU from our previous build and call it a day. But let's see if we can squeeze in 32 gigs of DDR5 along with a more powerful GPU. Now, we will once again build on the AM5 platform since it still provides the better value for money. As for the processor, we still have to stick to 6 core processor. Some modern games do benefit a little bit from 8 core processors, but that's a trade off I'm willing to make room for a little bit more powerful GPU. So the processor I would select is the Ryzen 5 7600X for 17,994 rupees. It has a max boost clock of 5.3 GHz with a default TDP of 105 watts. Oddly, the 7600 non-X is a bit costlier than the X variant here. Usually it's the other way around, but it's what it is. For the motherboard, the Gigabyte B850M Wi-Fi 6C, which I suggested as an option in my previous build, is a decent option. It has got true 8 phases of 55 amps DRMOS for VRM, which is really solid and should be able to handle even a Ryzen 9 processor if you wish to throw in one. It has also got 3 M.2 slots, one of which is Gen 5. However, the only downside is the USB Type-A support at the back panel, which is limited to only 5 of them. Although it has got a Type-C port, but a couple of more Type-A ports would have been nice to have. But overall, a decent enough motherboard for 12,794. So let's add this to our build. As for the memory, let's check out the 32GB DDR5 pricing. Looks like the cheapest one is available for 28,250 rupees. However, it has a speed of 5200 megatransfers per second. But more importantly, it is a single 32GB stick. So no dual channel with this one. Let me check the cheapest 16 by 2 kit. This Crucial Pro is a 16 times 2 kit with 6000 megatransfers having CL36 timings. And for this particular kit, we have to pay a whopping 33,299 rupees. When I was building my personal rig about 7 months back, I paid around 10,000 rupees for a 32GB 6000 megatransfers CL30 16 by 2 kit. Now we are paying more than thrice and still losing a little bit on the timing side. It's really sad, but it's what we have for now. Once again, for the storage and CPU cooler, I will be keeping my previous build selections. The Kingston NV3 1TB for storage and the Ant Esports ICE C612 digital for the cooler. I believe they are sufficient enough for this build. Now for the GPU, I think a 9070 XT is within our range. Let's check out the prices. The cheapest model is the Power Color Reaper for 69,499 rupees. It's about 10,000 rupees above MSRP. But the GPU price situation is getting worse with every passing day. Also, when it comes to GPU models, the performance difference between the cheapest and the costliest model of the same graphic card is at max 3 to 4%. The costlier models do have better VRMs and better cooler with better overclocking support, sometimes comes with better aesthetics, but in my honest opinion, most of the time the price jump is not worth the benefits. So let's go with the Power Color Reaper 9070 XT for 69,499 rupees. Now for the 9070 XT, AMD recommends a minimum of 750 watt PSU. So as usual, I will go with a 850 watt PSU for future upgradability. A fully modular tier B unit is what I am targeting. The MSI Mag A850GL or the Deepcool PN850M are both excellent choices. I am personally using the PN850M in my system. The price difference between them currently is less than 300 rupees. However, I'm a little bit inclined towards the Deepcool model because Deepcool lists in their website that they are using Japanese bulk capacitor for the P&M model, whereas I could not find much information regarding the capacitors used in the MSI model. In PSU manufacturing, Japanese bulk capacitors are considered gold standard. Also, the P&M comes with 10 years of warranty, whereas the MSI Mac comes with 7 years of warranty. Now, I'm not saying the MSI model uses inferior quality capacitors. I'm just saying I could not find a reliable source of information about them. However, the reviews of both the models are highly positive, and I don't think you would go wrong choosing either one of them. So I'm choosing the Deepcool model for this build for 8679 rupees. Finally, for the cabinet, I could still reuse the MSI Mac 120A airflow that I've been recommending for all the previous build in this build as well. But for the sake of a little variation, the Ant Esports Paper 5F for 3249 is not a bad option. It comes with 5 pre-installed fans, of which 2 are 140mm fans at the front. It also has got 3 USB Type-A support in the front panel, which is one more than the MSI model. And since our motherboard comes with only 5 USB Type-A support at the back panel, this extra USB is a welcome addition. But the max GPU length it supports is 320mm, which is 10mm less than the MSI model, so that's something to keep in mind. We should not have a problem with the 9070 XT Reaper we selected though, since it has a maximum GPU length of 304mm. So let's select this one for our build. So that brings the overall build cost of this particular build to 1,61,648 rupees, a little bit more than what I was targeting. Of course, you can select an RTX 5070 or an RX 9070 to reduce the build cost by about 7 to 8,000 rupees by sacrificing a little bit of performance. The performance of the RX 9070 is about 10% faster than the RTX 5070, and also the 9070 has got 4 gigs of more VRAM. But the 5070 has got latest Nvidia features like DLSS 4.5, which has more game support. The ray tracing performance of both the cards are comparable though. In any case, choosing either would still be a pretty solid build. In my personal rig, I'm using the RX 9070. Now, the prices of hardware are so volatile currently that by the time you are watching this video, the prices may have already changed. However, you'd still be able to get an idea of which components to use for your build in case you are trying to build a system at these price brackets.
So there you go. These are the components that I would recommend for your build if you're purchasing from the Indian PC hardware market. This build should provide you a great gaming experience while staying relevant for a good number of years. So that's it for this video, I guess. Do let me know your thoughts. If you want to add something or correct me, please do so in the comments below. So yeah, see you in the next one.